Millionaire pays beggar to pretend to be his girlfriend at party, and she arrives like a goddess. Michael Sullivan was desperate. His mother had organized yet another party to introduce him to daughters of businessmen, and this time she wouldn't accept any excuses. He needed to show up with someone, or face weeks of lectures about family responsibility and the need to continue the family business. That's when he saw the woman sitting on the bench in front of his building. She held a worn-out book, and even in her simple, tattered clothes, there was something about her posture that caught his eye. Michael made an impulsive decision that would completely change his life. The woman's name was Emily Parker, and she had been there for 3 months. She slept on that bench every night, surviving on small handouts from kind passers-by. When the man in the expensive suit approached her that Thursday afternoon, Emily thought he was just another curious stranger, or someone looking to give her spare change. "Sorry to bother you," Michael said hesitantly, "but I have an unusual proposal." Emily looked up from her book. Her eyes were tired, but still sparkled with intelligence. She studied the man's face, trying to decipher his intentions. "What kind of proposal?" she asked cautiously. "I need someone to accompany me to a party tomorrow night. It's a formal event, lots of important people. I'll pay you $1,000 just to show up as my girlfriend for a few hours." Emily almost laughed at the absurdity. A clearly wealthy man offering her money to pretend to be his partner. There was something desperate in his voice that made her pay attention. "Why me?" she asked, closing the book. Michael didn't answer right away. The truth was, something about her intrigued him. Maybe it was the way she read with such focus, or the dignity she maintained despite her circumstances. "You seem different," he finally said. "And I need someone outside my social circle." Emily considered the offer. $1,000 meant food for weeks, maybe even a place to stay. But there was something more behind his request. "Any specific conditions?" she asked. "Just be convincing. My mother is complicated. She throws these parties to introduce me to women she considers suitable for marriage. And you don't want to marry any of them." "Exactly." Emily studied Michael's face more closely. He seemed sincere, but nervous. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that contrasted with his polished appearance. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But on one condition. You lend me proper clothes and let me take a shower before the party." Michael felt immense relief. He hadn't thought about the practical details, but now he realized it would take more than he'd imagined. "Of course, I can arrange all that. The party is tomorrow at 8 at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel." Emily nodded, already imagining what it would be like to be in such a luxurious place. It had been years since she'd set foot anywhere like that. The last formal event she'd attended was her own college graduation, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The next morning, Michael arrived at the bench earlier than usual. Emily was awake, organizing her few belongings into a plastic bag. She'd slept little, thinking about how strange the night would be. "Good morning," Michael said, carrying a travel bag. "I brought a few dress options. A friend helped me pick them out." Emily eyed the bag with curiosity. It had been so long since she'd worn new clothes that she'd forgotten what it felt like. "We can go to my apartment," Michael continued. "You can get ready in there at your leisure." Michael's apartment was on the 15th floor of a modern building in the Upper East Side. Emily couldn't hide her admiration when she saw the ocean view through the large windows. The place was elegant, but there was something cold about it, as if it were more of a showcase than a home. "The bathroom is this way," Michael said, pointing down a hallway. "Clean towels are in the closet. I'll let you settle in." Emily stepped into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection surprised her. Months of living on the streets had changed her appearance more than she'd realized. Her brown hair was messy and dull, and deep shadows lingered under her eyes. But she could still glimpse traces of the woman she once was. The hot shower was almost therapeutic. Emily stood under the spray for a long time, feeling the water wash away not just the dirt, but some of the weight she carried. When she stepped out, she tried on the dresses Michael had brought, The red one fit her best. It was elegant without being excessive, with a cut that flattered her naturally slender frame. When she looked at herself in the bedroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. The transformation was striking. Michael was in the living room when she stepped out. He turned to greet her and stopped mid-sentence. The woman in front of him was completely different from the one he'd met in the square. It wasn't just the clothes or the styled hair. There was a poise, a natural grace he hadn't expected. "You look perfect," he said, unable to hide his astonishment. Emily smiled for the first time since they'd met. It was a smile that lit up her whole face, revealing a beauty her circumstances had hidden. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I felt like this." Michael realized there was far more to this woman than he'd imagined. The way she moved, the way she spoke, it all suggested a refined upbringing. But he didn't want to ask questions that might be intrusive. "We should go over some details about our story," he said. "My mother will have a lot of questions. They spent the afternoon crafting a fictional version of how they'd met. Emily suggested they say they'd run into each other at a bookstore. It would be easy to keep the conversation going if the topic came up." Michael was impressed by how effortlessly she thought through the details. As they talked, he discovered Emily had well-formed opinions on literature, art, and politics. She spoke knowledgeably about subjects many people in his social circle only pretended to understand. There was a depth to her observations that intrigued him more and more. "Can I ask how you ended up?" Michael started but stopped, realizing it might be too personal. "Living on the street," Emily finished. "It's a long story. Maybe another time." Michael respected her silence, but grew even more curious. There were mysteries about Emily he wanted to unravel, but he knew he'd have to earn her trust first. When it was time to leave for the party, Michael dressed quickly. He wore a classic black tuxedo that accentuated his height and athletic build. When he stepped out of the bedroom, Emily was on the balcony watching the sunset over the ocean. "Ready?" he asked. Emily turned, and Michael was struck once more by the change in her. She'd found some subtle makeup in the apartment and styled her hair simply but elegantly. The result was breathtaking. "Ready," she replied, picking up the small clutch Michael had provided. The ride to the hotel was quiet. Both were nervous, each for their own reasons. Michael because he knew his mother would be relentless with her questions. Emily because it had been years since she'd been in a social setting like this. The Ritz-Carlton Hotel was glowing and bustling with activity. Luxury cars pulled up in front of the entrance, dropping off elegantly dressed guests. Emily felt a knot in her stomach as she took in the scale of the event. "It's going to be fine," said Michael, sensing her apprehension. "You look stunning, and you'll do perfectly." Emily took a deep breath and nodded. She had faced far worse situations in recent months. A party, no matter how intimidating, wouldn't be her greatest challenge. When they entered the main hall, conversations noticeably quieted. All eyes turned toward the couple, especially Emily. Her red dress stood in dramatic contrast to the more subdued tones the other women wore. "Who is she?" Emily heard someone whisper. "I've never seen her before," replied another voice. Michael guided her through the room, greeting acquaintances and introducing Emily as his girlfriend. She smiled and answered questions naturally, impressing everyone with her grace and intelligence. Mrs. Barbara Sullivan, Michael's mother, watched from a distance. She had hoped her son would arrive alone once again, giving her the chance to push her marriage plans. The presence of this unknown woman completely disrupted her agenda. "Michael, darling," Mrs. Barbara said as she finally approached, "aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" "Of course, Mom. This is Emily Parker, my girlfriend. Emily, this is my mother, Barbara Sullivan." Emily extended her hand with a warm smile. Mrs. Barbara greeted her, but her eyes scrutinized Emily critically, trying to place which family she came from. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Barbara," Emily said. "Michael speaks very highly of you." "How interesting. And which family are you from, dear? Your last name sounds familiar." Emily kept her composure, but Michael sensed the tension. He quickly stepped in. "Emily works in education, Mum. You two have a lot in common." Mrs. Barbara wasn't satisfied with the vague answer, but she was interrupted by other guests who wanted to greet Michael and meet his mysterious companion. Throughout the first hour of the party, Emily handled herself magnificently. She spoke easily on various topics, displaying a knowledge that impressed even the most discerning guests. Michael grew increasingly intrigued by her story. "How do you know so much about modern art?" he asked during a quiet moment. "I've always loved reading," Emily replied simply. "And before, well, I had access to a good education." Before Michael could press further, they were interrupted by an older man who approached with clear interest. "Excuse me," the man said. "I'm Dr. Richard Thompson. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about the American Impressionists. It's rare to find someone who knows Winslow Homer's work so well." Emily blushed slightly. She had gotten carried away in the discussion and might have revealed more knowledge than was prudent for someone supposedly working only in education. "I've always admired his work," she replied carefully. "You remind me of someone," Dr. Richard continued, studying her face. "You couldn't have studied at State University, could you? I've had many brilliant students there over the years." Emily's chest tightened. Dr. Richard had been her professor during her undergraduate years long ago. She hoped he wouldn't make the connection, but she could see recognition dawning in his eyes. "I think you must be mistaking me for someone else," she said quickly. Michael noticed Emily's discomfort and steered her away from the conversation. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he could see she was shaken. "Are you okay?" he asked when they found a more private corner. "Yes, I just think he confused me with someone else. It happens sometimes." But Michael noticed her hands trembling slightly. There was definitely something Emily wasn't telling, and he began to suspect her story was far more complicated than he'd imagined. The party continued, and Emily gradually regained her composure. She danced with Michael, chatted with other guests, and even managed to impress some of the business people present with her sharp observations about economics and politics. Mrs. Barbara Sullivan, however, hadn't given up her investigation. She watched Emily closely, searching for any clue about her true identity. There was something about the young woman's posture and way of speaking that didn't match the simple explanation Michael had given. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. During dinner, Emily sat between Michael and one of his married friends. The conversation flowed naturally, and she felt more and more at ease. For a moment, she almost forgot this was just a temporary arrangement. "Emily, you never told us how you met our Michael," said Jennifer, the wife of one of his friends. "We met at a bookstore," Emily replied, sticking to the story they'd agreed on. "We were both looking for the same book." "How romantic," Jennifer exclaimed. "And what was the book?" Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second. They hadn't thought of that detail. "The Great Gatsby," Michael quickly said. "The last 2 copies of the annotated edition." "And who got the book?" Jennifer pressed, amused by the story. "He let me have it," Emily answered with a smile. "That's how I knew he was a gentleman." Michael smiled back, and for a moment, there was something genuine between them. The chemistry they were pretending to have was starting to feel all too real. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman Emily hadn't been introduced to. Brittany Reynolds, Michael's cousin, who was notoriously jealous of any attention he received. "Michael, darling," Brittany said with a forced smile. "What a surprise to see you with someone. I thought you'd never settle down." "Brittany, this is Emily, my girlfriend," Michael said coolly. Brittany studied Emily with a critical eye. There was something about her that bothered her, a natural elegance that Brittany herself, despite all her money, had never managed to achieve. "Nice to meet you," Brittany said. "What is it you do again?" "Education," Emily replied simply. "How interesting. And where exactly?" Michael realized Brittany was being deliberately intrusive and tried to change the subject, but Emily chose to answer. "I work in adult literacy," she said, inventing something that sounded noble but vague enough to avoid further questions. "How noble of you," Brittany said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "It must be very rewarding." Emily kept her smile, but Michael saw the tension in her shoulders. He knew his cousin well enough to recognize she was trying to humiliate Emily somehow. "It is very rewarding, yes," Emily replied calmly. There are few things more fulfilling than helping someone discover the world through reading. Her answer was so sincere that even Brittany was momentarily speechless. There was a genuine passion in Emily's voice that made it impossible to doubt her dedication. Well, I should go greet the other guests, Brittany finally said, clearly frustrated she hadn't managed to unsettle Emily. As she walked away, Michael leaned toward Emily. Sorry about that. Brittany has always been difficult. Don't worry, Emily replied. I know the type. But Michael noticed something had shifted in Emily's expression. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. He began to suspect that the comment about literacy hadn't been entirely made up. The night wore on, and the party grew livelier. A small orchestra played classical music as couples danced in the center of the hall. Michael offered his hand to Emily. Would you like to dance? Emily hesitated. It had been years since she'd danced, and she feared she might be rusty. But the music was beautiful, and Michael looked at her expectantly. Of course, she finally said. They made their way to the dance floor, and Michael took her in his arms. To her surprise, Emily danced magnificently. Her movements were natural and elegant, as if she'd spent years practicing. You dance beautifully, Michael said, impressed. I learned when I was young, Emily replied. My mother insisted every young lady should know how to dance. It was the first time she'd mentioned her family, and Michael tucked the information away. Every little detail he discovered about Emily intrigued him more. As they danced, Emily allowed herself to relax completely for the first time in months. Being in Michael's arms, moving to the music in an elegant hall, reminded her of who she used to be. For a few minutes, she managed to forget her current situation entirely. Michael, too, was affected by the moment. The woman in his arms was far more than he'd expected when he'd made that impulsive proposal. There was a depth to her that drew him in, a mix of fragility and strength that fascinated him. May I ask you a personal question? He said as they danced. You can try, Emily replied with a smile. Why did you accept my offer? $1,000 couldn't have been enough to make up for the embarrassment of pretending to be a stranger's girlfriend. Emily thought carefully before answering. There were truths she could share and others she needed to keep secret. Sometimes we have to do things we never imagined we would, she said finally. And you didn't strike me as a dangerous stranger. How could you be sure? By the book you were reading when we met. Michael stopped dancing for a moment, confused. I wasn't reading any book. No, but I was. And you showed genuine interest when you saw it was F. Scott Fitzgerald. Most people pretend not to notice or make empty comments. You made an insightful remark about his style. Michael remembered the conversation. He had indeed commented on F. Scott Fitzgerald, but he hadn't thought Emily had paid such close attention. You were analyzing me the whole time, he said, impressed. I learned to read people quickly, Emily replied. It's a matter of survival. Sadness returned to her eyes, and Michael felt an inexplicable urge to protect her. There was something in the way she spoke about survival that touched his heart deeply. The music ended, and they returned to the table. Mrs. Barbara Sullivan watched them from a distance, clearly unsettled by the obvious chemistry between her son and his mysterious companion. She had planned this party specifically to introduce him to Victoria Anderson, the daughter of an important businessman and, in her opinion, the perfect candidate for a daughter-in-law. Michael, Mrs. Barbara called as they approached, come meet the Andersons. I brought Victoria especially to meet you. Michael sighed inwardly. His mother wouldn't give up her plans so easily. He glanced at Emily, who nodded understandingly. Go ahead, she said. I'll take some fresh air on the terrace. Michael didn't want to leave her alone, but he couldn't ignore his mother completely without causing a scene. He gently squeezed Emily's hand before following Mrs. Barbara. Emily headed to the terrace, glad for a few minutes to herself. The party had been far more emotionally intense than she'd expected. It wasn't just the pressure of pretending to be someone she wasn't. It was the way Michael treated her, with a respect and kindness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The terrace offered a breathtaking view of South Beach. The city lights reflected on the ocean, creating a magical panorama. Emily leaned against the railing and breathed in the sea air, trying to organize her thoughts. Emily? A voice behind her made her turn. It was Dr. Richard, the professor who had almost recognized her earlier. He approached with a concerned expression. "I knew it was you," he said softly. "Emily Grace Parker, my best student in the literature course." Emily felt her heart race. Being discovered was exactly what she feared. She considered denying it again, but knew it would be pointless. "Dr. Richard," she finally said, "I didn't expect to see you here. Nor did I expect to see you like this," he replied, clearly referring to her elegant appearance contrasting with what he knew about her current situation. "Emily, what happened to you? After you left the university, no one knew where you went." Tears began to form in Emily's eyes. For months she had avoided thinking about her past life, about everything she had lost. Having someone who knew her before confront her with that reality was devastating. "It's a long story," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "I have time," Dr. Richard replied gently, "and you were always more than just a student to me. You were like a daughter." Emily looked around, making sure they were alone on the terrace. Then, for the first time in months, she began to tell her story. "After graduation, I got a job as a professor at Coastal University," she started. "It was everything I ever wanted. Teaching, doing research, mentoring students. For 2 years, it was perfect." Dr. Richard nodded, remembering the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about her academic plans. "But then I discovered irregularities in the administration," Emily continued. "Falsified documents, misused funds, diplomas being sold. It was a big scheme, involving several important people." "And you reported it?" "I tried to do the right thing. I went to the dean believing he would investigate and fix the problems, but he was involved too." Emily paused for a moment, the pain of the memory still fresh in her mind. "What happened when you confronted him?" Dr. Richard asked. "First, they tried to bribe me. They offered me a promotion, a raise, anything to keep me quiet. When I refused, they started the smear campaign." "How so?" "They fabricated evidence against me. Said I was taking bribes from students, that I falsified my own qualifications, that I had inappropriate relationships with students. It was all lies, every bit of it. But they had power and influence." Dr. Richard shook his head, horrified. He knew Emily well enough to know she would never do any of those things. "And the justice system? Didn't you seek legal help?" "I tried, but they got ahead of me. When I went to file a complaint, I found out there were already lawsuits against me. They had corrupted witnesses, fabricated evidence. I had no way to prove my innocence." "Emily," Dr. Richard said, watching the tears stream down her face, "I lost my job, my reputation, my friends. No one wanted to hire me because my name was tarnished. I used all my savings trying to defend myself legally, but it was useless. I lost my apartment, couldn't pay the bills." Emily paused to catch her breath, trying to control her emotions. "My family. My parents were so ashamed they asked me not to contact them anymore. They believed the accusations, everyone did. And you ended up on the streets." "Not immediately. First I stayed with some friends, but that didn't last long. No one wanted to be associated with me. Then I tried jobs in other fields, but they always ran background checks. My name came up linked to those false accusations." Dr. Richard was visibly shaken. He remembered Emily as a brilliant and upright young woman, full of dreams and ideals. Imagining she had gone through all this broke his heart. "Emily, you should have come to me. I knew you. I knew your character." "I thought about it many times," she admitted. "But I was afraid the lies about me would end up hurting you too. These people were powerful and vengeful. How long have you been living like this?" 2 years on the streets. At first I still tried to fight, to find ways to clear my name. But later, it's hard to hold on to hope when every day is a struggle just to survive." Dr. Richard fell silent for a moment, processing everything he had heard. Then, he looked at Emily with determination. "This can't go on. You're too young and too bright for your life to be destroyed by corrupt people. Dr. Richard, I appreciate your concern, but I've tried everything. There's no going back." "There's always a way," he said firmly, "and I'll help you find it." Before Emily could respond, Michael appeared on the terrace. He had gotten away from his mother and the Anderson family as quickly as possible and was looking for Emily. "There you are," he said, but stopped when he saw she had been crying. Did something happen? Emily quickly wiped her tears, trying to regain her composure. Dr. Richard watched her with understanding. "It's nothing," she said. "Dr. Richard is an old professor of mine. We were just catching up." Michael sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. He could see Emily was emotionally shaken. "Dr. Richard," Emily said, turning to the professor, "thank you for the talk. It was enlightening." "Emily, this isn't over," Dr. Richard said firmly. "Can we talk more later? I have some ideas that might help you." Emily nodded, though she didn't hold much hope. Dr. Richard handed her his business card and said goodbye, leaving her alone with Michael. "Are you sure you're okay?" Michael asked, sensing something important had happened. "Yes," Emily lied. "Just old memories." Michael didn't fully believe her, but respected her privacy. He offered his arm. "How about we head back to the party? My mother still wants to introduce us to more people." Emily smiled weakly and took his arm. They returned to the ballroom, but the conversation with Dr. Richard had shifted her entire mood. She felt exposed and vulnerable, as if her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. In the ballroom, the party was in full swing. The orchestra played a Viennese waltz, and couples danced elegantly in the center of the room. Emily tried to focus on the role she was playing, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Dr. Richard. "There you two are," said Mrs. Barbara, approaching with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, dear, I need to steal my son for a few minutes. There are some important people he needs to meet." Michael looked at Emily with an apologetic expression. She nodded understandingly, though the idea of being alone again made her uneasy. "Don't worry about me," she said. "I'll take the chance to admire the decorations." Emily walked away, casually strolling through the ballroom and taking in the party's details. The place was truly impressive, with crystal chandeliers, exotic flowers and decor that must have cost more than she made in an entire year when she still had a job. "Alone again?" A voice behind her made her turn. It was Brittany, Michael's cousin, with a sly smile on her lips. She held a champagne flute and had clearly drunk more than advisable. "Michael is busy with family commitments," Emily replied politely. "How convenient," Brittany said, stepping closer. "That gives me the chance to have a private conversation with you." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. There was something in Brittany's expression that put her on edge. "About what?" "About who you really are," Brittany said with a triumphant smile. "You may have fooled my cousin with this polished look, but I recognize an opportunist when I see one." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Of course you do. I saw you, you know. A few weeks ago, begging outside the mall. You were filthy, wearing rags, pleading for money. And now here you are, pretending to be a society lady." Emily felt the world spin around her. Being found out by Dr. Richard was one thing. He knew her and cared about her. But being exposed by someone like Brittany, who clearly wanted to use this information against her, was entirely different. "I don't know what you think you saw," Emily said, trying to maintain her dignity. "Oh, I know exactly what I saw," Brittany shot back, clearly pleased with herself. "And I'm wondering how much my cousin is paying you to pretend to be his girlfriend, because that's what you are, isn't it? A high-class escort." The cruel accusation made Emily tremble with anger. She had endured many humiliations over the past 2 years, but this one was especially painful because it came at a moment when she felt most vulnerable. "You're mistaken," Emily said with dignity. "And even if you weren't, it's none of your business." "Oh, but it is my business," Brittany said, stepping even closer and lowering her voice. "Because I won't let a gold digger like you take advantage of my family." Emily glanced around, noticing others were starting to take note of their tense exchange. She knew she had to leave before Brittany caused a scene. "Excuse me," she said, trying to step away, but Brittany grabbed her arm. "I'm not done talking to you," she snapped. You're going to leave this party right now and never come near my family again, or I'll tell everyone exactly what you are." Emily looked into Brittany's eyes and saw a malice that frightened her. She realized there was no way out without consequences. But then, something inside her rebelled. She had lost everything, been humiliated and broken, but she wouldn't let one more person treat her like trash. "You know what, Brittany?" Emily said, wrenching her arm free and speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You're right about one thing, I'm different from all of you." Several people stopped talking and turned toward them. Emily knew she was about to burn every bridge, but something inside her had snapped. "I've slept on the streets. I've gone hungry. I've been treated as invisible by society. And you know what I've learned? True nobility doesn't come from money or a last name. It comes from character." "What's going on here?" Michael had arrived, drawn by the growing attention. "Your little girlfriend was just explaining her true origins," Brittany said smugly. "Tell him, Emily. Tell him where you really live." Emily looked at Michael and saw confusion and concern in his eyes. She knew she had two choices: to flee in shame or to face the situation with dignity. "She's right, Michael," said Emily, surprising everyone. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Michael felt his heart tighten. He had grown more attached to Emily than he wanted to admit, and the idea that she had deceived him was painful. "Emily," he began, "I sleep in the square across from your building," she continued, ignoring the shocked expressions around her. "I have no home, no family, nothing but the clothes on my back. I accepted your offer because $1,000 means the difference between eating and going hungry for weeks." The room was utterly silent now. Every gaze was fixed on her, some in shock, others with disdain, some with morbid curiosity. "But there's one thing you all need to understand," Emily said, her voice growing stronger. "I may have lost everything, but I haven't lost my dignity. I'm not here to steal from anyone or take advantage. I'm here because a kind man gave me the chance to feel human again for one night." Brittany looked frustrated that Emily wasn't shrinking in shame as expected. "You're admitting you're a fraud," she said, "that you're here under false pretenses." "No," Emily replied firmly. "I'm admitting I'm poor. But poverty isn't a crime, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. What should be shameful is the cruelty people like you show toward those less fortunate." Dr. Richard, who had witnessed the entire scene, stepped forward. "Emily is right," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've known this young woman for years. She's one of the most honest and intelligent people I've ever met. If she's struggling, it's because she's been the victim of a great injustice." "And who are you?" Brittany snapped, clearly annoyed by the interference. "Dr. Richard Thompson, Professor Emeritus at State University. And I can assure you Emily Grace Parker has more education and class in her little finger than many people in this room have in their entire bodies." Dr. Richard's defense caused murmurs among the guests. His name carried weight in academic circles, and his opinion was respected. Michael, who had been silently processing everything, finally approached Emily. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" he asked softly. "Because I knew you'd never have offered me this chance if you knew," Emily answered honestly, "and because I was afraid of being judged exactly the way I am now." Michael looked around, taking in the guests' expressions, some curious, some uncomfortable, some clearly disapproving. His mother was approaching with a furious look. "Michael, what's going on here?" Mrs. Barbara Sullivan demanded. "Mum, we'll talk later," Michael said. "Right now, I want to make one thing clear to everyone." He turned to face the guests, took Emily's hand, and held it firmly. Emily may have lied about her financial situation, but that doesn't change who she is. Tonight, I talked to a woman who's smart, funny, brave, and kind. That's what matters to me. "Michael, you don't know what you're doing," Mrs. Barbara said. "This woman clearly has ulterior motives." "No, Mum. The only one with ulterior motives here was me. I hired her to pretend to be my girlfriend to avoid the blind dates you keep setting up for me." The revelation caused another stir among the guests. Mrs. Barbara flushed with embarrassment and anger. "How dare you humiliate me like this?" she said. "I'm ashamed, Mom, but not because of Emily. I'm ashamed because I resorted to a charade instead of having an honest conversation with you about my life." Brittany, seeing her attempt to humiliate Emily backfire, decided to play her final card. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Michael, are you going to ruin your reputation over some homeless woman? What will the company's clients think?" "They'll think I finally found someone who truly interests me," Michael replied without hesitation. The answer surprised him as much as everyone else. He hadn't planned to say that, but hearing his own words, he realized they were true. Emily looked at him with surprise and emotion. No one had stood up for her like that in years. No one had chosen to stay by her side when it would have been easier to walk away. "Michael," she began. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "I just want you to know I don't regret anything that happened tonight." Dr. Richard Thompson smiled, pleased with how things had unfolded. He approached Emily. "My offer still stands," he said quietly. "We can talk tomorrow about how to clear your name and rebuild your life." Emily nodded, feeling for the first time in years a spark of hope. The party gradually returned to normal, though many guests continued to cast curious glances in their direction. Mrs. Barbara Sullivan walked away, visibly upset, to speak with some friends and try to contain the damage to the family's reputation. "Want to leave?" Michael asked Emily. "I think that's best," she replied. "We've caused enough drama for one night." They headed for the exit, but were stopped by a middle-aged man Emily didn't recognize. "Excuse me," the man said. "I'm Brian Miller, HR Director at the Hope Foundation. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about adult literacy. We're always looking for qualified people for our programs." Emily was surprised. She had lied about working in literacy, but the man's interest seemed genuine. "I thank you for your interest," she said. "Here's my card," Brian said. "If you're interested, we can discuss opportunities. We work with underserved communities and always need dedicated people." Emily took the card, still processing the unexpected offer. In one night, she had gone from total humiliation to having 2 job offers. "See," Michael said as they left the hotel. "I told you you'd impress people." "Not in the way I imagined," Emily replied with a sad smile. "Maybe this is better. Now you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not." They walked silently to the car. Emily felt strangely light, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Yes, it had been humiliating to have her situation exposed like that, but it was also freeing to no longer hide who she really was. "Michael," she said when they reached the car. "About the money." "Forget the money," he interrupted. "You more than earned every penny just for putting up with my cousin. It's not that, it's just, I don't know if I can accept it. After everything that happened, it feels wrong." Michael stopped and turned to face her. "Emily, you held up your end of the deal. In fact, you did far more than I asked. You showed me and everyone at that party what true class and dignity look like. But now you know I'm not really your girlfriend. It was all pretend." "It was at first," Michael said softly. "But at some point during the night it stopped being pretend for me. I don't know when it happened, but it did." Emily felt her heart race. She had felt the same way, but hadn't dared to believe it could be mutual. "Michael, you don't really know me. You only know this version of me, polished and well-behaved. You don't know the woman who screams from nightmares in the park, who fights for food, who sometimes goes days without a shower." "Then let me know that woman too," he said. "Let me know every version of you." Emily didn't know how to respond. The offer was tempting, but also terrifying. She had protected herself for so long that the idea of opening up completely to someone frightened her. "It's a lot to process in one night," she finally said. "I understand," Michael replied. "How about we take it slow? Can I take you to dinner tomorrow? A real date this time, no pretending." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part reminded her of all the reasons it would be complicated. "Michael, you saw what happened today. Your family won't accept someone like me. Your friends, your business, everything will be affected." "Let me worry about that," he said. "The only question that matters is, do you want to try?" Emily looked into his eyes and saw genuine sincerity. There was no pity or condescension, just real interest and care. "Yes," she said softly, "I want to try." Michael smiled, and Emily felt that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to take a completely different turn. They got into the car and headed back to the Upper East Side, both lost in thoughts about what the future might hold. As they drove, Emily gazed out the window at the passing city lights. Just hours ago, she had been just another invisible person living on the fringes of society. Now she had 2 job offers and the attention of a man who seemed to genuinely care for her. "Where should I take you?" Michael asked as they neared the Upper East Side. "To the square," Emily replied. "That's where I live." "Emily, you don't have to go back there tonight. You can stay at my place. I have a guest room." She considered the offer. It was tempting, especially after the emotional night they'd had. But she knew she needed time to process everything that had happened. "Thank you, but I think I need some time alone to think. It's been a lot for one night." Michael nodded, though he clearly would have preferred her to stay. "Can I at least leave you with some things? Food? Water? Maybe a blanket?" "That would be very kind," she said. They stopped at Michael's apartment, where he quickly gathered some supplies. Emily changed back into her simple clothes but kept one of the blouses he had bought for her. "I'll keep this one if you don't mind," she said, "to remember the night." "Keep everything," Michael said. "The clothes, the shoes, all of it. I can't accept all that." "Of course you can. And if not for the memory of tonight, then accept it because you'll need proper clothes for your job interviews." Emily smiled. He was right. If she was really going to rebuild her life, she'd need to dress appropriately. When they reached the square, Michael insisted on walking her to the bench where she usually slept. It was a relatively sheltered spot, near a street lamp that provided some security at night. "I don't like the idea of leaving you here," he said. "I'll be fine," Emily assured him. "I've done this for 2 years. One more night won't kill me." "But it doesn't have to be one more night. It could be the last night." She looked at him with hope and fear mingled in her eyes. "I don't want to set my expectations too high," she said. Learning to handle disappointment was one of the hardest lessons of the last few years. "I understand," Michael said, "but don't be afraid to believe good things can happen either." He kissed her gently on the forehead before leaving, promising to return the next day for their planned date. Emily settled onto the bench with the blanket Michael had brought. It was more comfortable than anything she'd used in months. She looked up at the building where Michael lived, seeing the lights still on in his apartment. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream. Maybe rebuilding her life was possible. Maybe Dr. Richard could really help her clear her name. Maybe the job at the foundation was a real opportunity. And perhaps, just perhaps, what was growing between her and Michael could turn into something true and lasting. But first, she needed to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day, full of possibilities she hadn't considered in years. For the first time in a long while, Emily fell asleep with a smile on her face. Meanwhile, in the apartment above, Michael was also struggling to sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about her courage in facing Brittany, about her dignity when her true situation was revealed. There was something about her that drew him in a way he'd never experienced before. He knew his mother would be furious about the night's events, that his family would question his decisions, that even his business might be affected. But for the first time in years, it didn't worry him. He'd found someone who made him want to be a better person, someone who inspired him with her strength and resilience. Michael fell asleep, making plans for the next day, eager to get to know the extraordinary woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. Morning came early for Emily. She had slept better than expected, but woke with the sunrise, as always happened when she slept outdoors. Michael's blanket had made a huge difference in her comfort, and she felt more rested than she had in weeks. She got up, carefully folded the blanket, and organized her few belongings. She had 2 interviews to schedule today, one with Dr. Richard and another with Brian from the Hope Foundation. For the first time in years, she had professional commitments that didn't involve begging or doing odd jobs just to survive. Emily walked to the nearest public fountain to freshen up. It wasn't ideal, but she had become an expert at keeping herself clean and presentable, even with limited resources. She put on the blouse Michael had given her and combed her hair as best she could. As she got ready, she thought about the previous night. It had been the most intense emotional roller coaster she'd ever experienced, from the terror of being exposed to the relief of finally being honest about her situation. And of course there was Michael. She still wasn't quite sure what to make of him. His actions at the party had shown a character she hadn't expected from someone of his social standing. But she also knew that the reality of the next day could be very different from the magic of a party night. Emily decided to call Dr. Richard first. She used a payphone near the square, inserting the few coins she had. "Dr. Richard, it's Emily." "Emily, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about you since last night. Can you come to my office this morning? I have some proposals to discuss." "Of course. What time would work for you? Is 10 o'clock good?" Emily glanced at the public clock in the square. It was 8:30, giving her enough time to reach Dr. Richard's office. "Perfect. I'll be there." Dr. Richard's office was at the university where he had taught for decades. Emily took 2 buses to get there, using some of the money Michael had given her the night before. It felt strange to be back in an academic setting after so long. When she arrived at the building, she was hit with a mix of nostalgia and pain. That environment had been her home for years during her studies. It was where she had dreamed of her future, where she had believed she would make a difference in the world through education. "Emily!" Dr. Richard greeted her with a warm hug. Come in. How are you feeling after last night?" "Confused but hopeful," Emily answered honestly. Richard was exactly as she remembered, surrounded by books, papers organized in seemingly chaotic piles, and the familiar scent of coffee and old paper. "Have a seat, my dear. I have much to discuss with you." Emily settled into the armchair across from his desk, trying not to show how nervous she was. "First," Dr. Richard said, "I want you to know I spent the whole night thinking about your situation, and I have good news." "What kind of good news?" "Do you remember Dr. William Foster? He was your history of education professor." Emily nodded. Dr. Foster had been one of her favorite teachers. "Well, he now works at the Department of Education in a rather high position. I called him this morning and told him your story. He was outraged by what happened and wants to help." "How can he help?" "First, he'll launch an official investigation into the irregularities at Coastal University. With the weight of the department behind it, it'll be much harder for them to cover anything up." Emily felt a spark of hope, but also fear. "Dr. Richard, these people are powerful. If they find out I'm trying to fight back..." "Emily, you can't live in fear forever. And now you have powerful allies too. Dr. Foster isn't just influential, he's known for his integrity. If he's on your side, other important people will take notice. What about the accusations against me? How can I prove they were false?" "Dr. Foster is already working on that. He has access to investigative resources you never had. If there's evidence the accusations were fabricated, he'll find it." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. After years of hopelessness, the possibility of clearing her name seemed almost surreal. "There's more," Dr. Richard continued. "Regardless of the investigation's outcome, Dr. Foster can offer you a job at the department. Temporary at first, but with potential to become permanent if you do well." "What kind of job?" "Adult literacy program development. Ironic, isn't it? Your lie from last night might become reality." Emily laughed through her tears. Life really had a peculiar sense of humor. "Dr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me, Emily. I'm doing this because I believe in you and because what happened was a terrible injustice. But I'm also doing it because I know you'll use this second chance to make a difference in others' lives." "Of course I will," Emily said with conviction. "If I can rebuild my life, I want to help others going through what I did." Dr. Richard smiled, pleased with her answer. "Wonderful. Dr. Foster wants to meet with you next week. Until then, I suggest you accept the offer from the Hope Foundation as a way to gain practical experience in the field." Emily remembered the card Brian had given her the night before. "Speaking of which, I need to call him today." "Excellent. And Emily?" "Yes?" "About that young man, Michael. He seems genuinely interested in you." Emily blushed slightly. "I still don't know what to think about that. It's all very complicated." "Life is complicated, my dear. But that doesn't mean we should run from opportunities for happiness. Just be careful not to let your past block your future." Emily nodded, reflecting on his words. She knew Dr. Richard was right, but there were still so many fears and insecurities to overcome. "One last thing," Dr. Richard said. "Do you need a place to stay while we sort all this out?" Michael offered his apartment, but I thought it best to keep some independence for now. "I understand. Well, if you change your mind, my wife and I have a guest room. We'd be happy to have you." Emily was moved by Dr. Richard and his wife's kindness. "Thank you. I'll think about it." She left Dr. Richard Thompson's office with a heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, there was a concrete plan to rebuild her life. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but it was possible. Emily decided to call Brian from the Hope Foundation before meeting Michael for lunch. She found another payphone and dialed the number on the card. "Hope Foundation, Brian speaking." "Mr. Brian, it's Emily Parker. We met last night at the party." "Emily, I'm so glad you called. I was hoping to hear from you. Can you come talk today?" "Of course. What time would work for you?" "How about now? I'm free until 2 in the afternoon." Emily glanced at her watch. It was noon. She had enough time to speak with Brian and still make it to her meeting with Michael. "I'll be there in an hour." The Hope Foundation headquarters was in a middle-class neighborhood, in a simple but well-kept building. Emily immediately liked the atmosphere. There was a warm and welcoming vibe that contrasted with the corporate coldness she remembered from other places. Brian greeted her personally at the reception. "Emily, it's a pleasure to see you again. How are you?" "Good, thank you. Ready to learn more about your work." Brian led her through the facilities, showing the classrooms where literacy lessons took place, the community library, and the shared spaces. "We mainly serve residents from underprivileged communities," Brian explained. "Many are adults who never had the chance to learn to read and write as children." "What kind of methodology do you use?" "We base our work primarily on the ideas of John Dewey, literacy as a practice of freedom, connecting learning to the student's reality." Emily nodded, impressed. She had extensively studied John Dewey's pedagogy during her training. "That's exactly the kind of approach I believe in," she said. "Great. And based on our conversation last night, I get the sense you have hands-on experience with this population." Emily hesitated. She could lie again, or be honest about her situation. "Yes, I have experience," she finally said. "For the past 2 years I was homeless. I know what it means to be invisible to society, to feel excluded and hopeless." Brian stopped walking and looked at her with an expression of surprise and respect. "Emily, that's not a disadvantage for working here. It's a tremendous advantage. Our students will connect with you in a way they never could with someone who hasn't faced similar struggles." "Are you sure? I know I caused embarrassment last night when my situation was revealed at the party." "That was a high society party, Emily. Here, it's different. Here, your life experience is one of your greatest assets." Emily felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, her hardships were being seen as something positive rather than an obstacle. "When can I start?" "How about tomorrow? We can begin with you observing some classes, getting familiar with our methods. Then gradually you can take on your own groups." "What about pay?" "It's not much," Brian admitted, "but it's enough for a modest apartment and basic needs, and there's room for growth as you gain experience." Emily could hardly believe it. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from having no prospects to 2 job offers. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "Excellent. I'll prepare the paperwork. Can you come tomorrow at 8 in the morning?" "I'll be here." Emily left the Hope Foundation walking on air. Her life was truly changing. Now it was time to meet Michael and see how he was handling the daylight after the events of the previous night. They had agreed to meet at a restaurant on the Upper East Side. It was a simple place, far from the elite social circles of South Beach where Michael usually moved. Emily appreciated the gesture. He was clearly trying to choose a setting where she'd feel comfortable. When she arrived at the restaurant, Michael was already there, looking a little nervous. He stood up when he saw her enter and smiled, but Emily could tell something was weighing on his mind. "How was your morning?" he asked after they sat down. "Unbelievable," Emily replied, telling him about her conversations with Dr. Richard and Brian. It seems I have a real chance to rebuild my life. That's wonderful, Emily. You deserve every opportunity. But there was something in his voice that suggested not everything was all right. And how was your morning? She asked. Michael sighed. Complicated. My mother called me at 7. She was, well, you can imagine. What did she say? Mostly that I'd embarrassed the family, that I didn't know what I was doing, that you were an opportunist trying to take advantage of me. Emily's heart tightened. She had expected this reaction, but it still hurt to hear it. And what did you say to her? That she was wrong about you, and that I'm old enough to make my own decisions about who I want to be with. How did she take that? Not well, Michael admitted. She threatened to cut my stake in the family business if I kept associating with questionable elements. Emily was shocked. Michael, you can't lose your company because of me. We barely know each other. Emily, it's important you understand something. My stake in the company has always come with strings attached. My mother has always tried to control my personal life through financial blackmail. Maybe it's time for me to find my own independence. But that's your inheritance, your future. Not if it's a future where I can't make my own choices, Michael interrupted. Besides, I have an education, experience, connections. I can build something of my own. Emily was impressed by his determination, but also worried. Are you sure you're not making a rash decision? Last night was very intense for all of us. That's why I wanted to see you today, Michael said. To make sure what I felt last night wasn't just adrenaline. And what did you decide? Michael looked her straight in the eyes. That I'm more interested in you today than I was yesterday. Talking to you about your experiences, seeing your strength and determination, hearing your plans for the future, it all draws me in even more. Emily's heart raced. There was a sincerity in his words that touched her deeply. Michael, I'm drawn to you too, but I need to be honest about something. What is it? I'm scared. Over the past 2 years, I've learned not to trust people easily, not to set my hopes too high. I'm trying to rebuild my life from scratch, and that's terrifying. I don't know if I'm ready to add a relationship to all this complexity. Michael nodded understandingly. I get that, and I don't want to pressure you or make things harder than they already are. So, what do you suggest? That we take things slow. No pressure, no unrealistic expectations, just 2 people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. Emily considered the offer. It was sensible and respectful, exactly what she needed to hear. That sounds good to me, she finally said. Great. And Emily? Yes? About my mother's comment that you're an opportunist. I want you to know that's ridiculous. If you were an opportunist, you would have agreed to stay at my place last night, asked for more money, tried to take advantage of the situation. Instead, you were honest about your limits and insisted on keeping your independence. Thank you for saying that, said Emily, moved. It's the truth, and one more thing. If you need any help during this transition, financial or otherwise, please come to me. Not as a romantic favor, but as a friend who cares about your well-being. Emily was touched by the offer, but also determined to maintain her independence. Thank you, Michael. For now, I think I'm on the right track with job opportunities, but it's good to know I can count on you if needed. They spent the rest of lunch talking about lighter topics, books, movies, places they'd like to visit. Emily discovered that Michael was deeper and more interesting than she had initially imagined. He had studied literature in college before being pressured to focus on the family business, and he had passions and interests that went far beyond making money. Can I ask you a personal question? Emily said when they finished eating. Of course. Why have you never married? I mean, you're handsome, successful, well-educated. Your mother must have no trouble finding candidates. Michael laughed bitterly. That's exactly the problem. All the women my mother introduces me to are interested in Michael Sullivan, the wealthy heir. Not Michael, the person, and the few times I've genuinely liked someone, they were intimidated by my financial situation or family expectations. That must be lonely. It is. That's why your honesty yesterday was so refreshing. For the first time, someone saw me for who I really am, not for what I represent financially. Emily understood perfectly. She had experienced the opposite side of the same coin, being judged for her lack of resources rather than her character. "So we're both social outcasts," she said with a smile. "You rejected for being too rich, me rejected for being too poor." "Maybe that's why we get along so well," Michael replied. When they finished lunch, Michael insisted on walking Emily back to the square, where she was staying temporarily. "About tonight," he said when they arrived. "The offer for the guest room still stands." "Thank you, but I think I'll accept Dr. Richard and his wife's offer. It would be more appropriate." Michael nodded, though he clearly preferred she stay with him. "I understand. And when can I see you again?" "How about tomorrow evening, after my first day at the Hope Foundation?" "Perfect. Can I pick you up?" "Better if we meet somewhere. I'm still adjusting to all these changes." "Whatever you prefer." Michael leaned in and kissed Emily gently on the cheek before leaving. It was a sweet, respectful gesture that left her with butterflies in her stomach. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon organizing her few belongings and calling Dr. Richard to accept the lodging offer. His wife, Mrs. Margaret, was extremely warm on the phone and insisted Emily come for dinner that evening. As the afternoon passed, Emily reflected on the dramatic changes that had happened in her life in just 24 hours. Less than a day before, she had been just another homeless person, invisible and without prospects. Now she had a job, a place to stay, a plan to clear her name, and the attention of a man who genuinely seemed to care for her. It was almost impossible to believe such drastic changes could happen so quickly. Part of her was euphoric, but another part was terrified. What if it was all too good to be true? What if something went wrong? Emily tried to push those negative thoughts away. Dr. Richard had told her not to let her past hold back her future, and she was determined to follow that advice. She had survived the worst life could throw at her. Now it was time to see if she could handle the best. As she packed her things, Emily thought about all the people who had helped her in the last 24 hours. Michael, Dr. Richard, Brian from the Hope Foundation, even Mrs. Margaret, who didn't even know her but was willing to take her in. After years of feeling like the world was hostile and indifferent, discovering that there was still kindness and generosity left her deeply moved. But it also made her feel an enormous responsibility. All these people were investing in her, believing in her potential. She couldn't let them down. More importantly, she couldn't let herself down. Emily took one last look at the bench where she had slept for 2 years. Tomorrow night, she'd be in a real bed, in a real home, with people who cared about her. It was the end of a terrible chapter in her life and the beginning of something entirely new. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, feeling a profound gratitude for all the possibilities ahead. Then, for the first time in years, Emily walked away from that square, knowing she wouldn't have to return. The end. So, what did you think of this story of transformation and second chances? Do you think Emily truly managed to rebuild her life, or did she still face other challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. What lesson did this story bring you? I'd love to read your honest feedback. Thank you so much for joining me, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories.